Article 1240. Payment shall be made to the person in whose favor the obligation has been constituted, or his successor in interest, or any person authorized to receive it. It's like to whom must payment be made. The one obliged to make payment incumbent upon him must do so too. First is the creditor at the time of the payment. This is what is referred to in the phrase to the person in whose favor the obligation has been constituted. The second is to the successors in interest of the creditor. Like for example, payment must be made to his her. So, third is to any person who bears the authority to receive such payment. It's like a person acquires authority to receive payment by virtue of an agreement or by law. For example, Jane is the creditor of Liza. She now presented herself to Liza, the debtor, and alleged that she has been given authority by Jane to receive the money, and Liza paid the whole amount to Sheena. Like, the payment is not valid. Liza is still indebted to Jane. It must be noted that payment made to a person without any authority to collect the debt is at risk of loss on the part of the person paying. This is to protect the interest of the creditor. If any debtor can allege payment made in favor of just anyone, the right of the creditor to collect what he rightfully owns will be impaired. It is unwritten rule, therefore, that a debtor should exert all efforts to verify the authority of the person collecting the payment. Article 1241. Payment to a person who is incapacitated to administer his property shall be valid if he has kept the thing delivered or insofar as the payment has been beneficial to him. Payment made to a third person shall also be valid insofar as it has redounded to the benefit of the creditor. Such benefit to the creditor need to be proved the following cases. First, if after the payment the third person acquires the creditor's rights. Second, if the creditor ratifies the payment to the third person. And the third, if by the creditor's conduct the debtor has been led to believe that the third person had authority to receive the payment. This article provides a discussion on payments made to incapacitated person and those made to unauthorized persons. As a general rule, payment made to an incapacitated person is not valid. So it is nevertheless valid if the incapacitated person to whom the payment was made kept the thing delivered, and valid only to the extent where the delivery redounded to his benefit. Thus, example, if Jane is indebted to Liza in the amount of 100,000 and pays to the latter the amount during Liza's insanity, the payment is void. However, if Liza received the money but never spent it, the payment would be valid and Jane's obligation would be extinguished. So what if Liza's during her insanity and during her keeping and possession of the 100,000 was defrauded into buying a pair of shoes which was actually worth 75,000? So then the payment made by Jane would still be valid up to the extent beneficial to Liza. Since Liza did not acquire a beneficial use of 25,000 excess, it cannot be deemed valid. Article 1242. Payment made in good faith to any person in possession of the credit shall release the debtor. This law is intended to protect the debtor from being required to pay again the payee. So, possession of credit. Possession of credit does not refer to the real creditor or hers, or the persons authorized by him or by law under Article 1240. It refers to the person who has the appearance of the creditor but who actually is not. This is different from possession of the document representing the document. For example, if a document which is payable to order or to a definite person is in the possession of someone but without any endorsement, the possession is not of the credit but only of the title, and payment to the holder is not a valid payment. The position of credit means an actual and legal relation between the credit and the possessor of the document. So for example, an instrument payable is bearer is held by the person to whom it is intended. So for example, Jane is the owner of a parcel of land. She sold the land to Liza with a right to repurchase. During the war, Jane failed to find Liza and the land was attached by the revolutionary government. Since Jane has a right to repurchase, she paid the repurchase price to the revolutionary government in good faith. It turned out, however, that Liza sold the land to Sheena. Jane brought an action to recover the land from Sheena. So the issue here is whether or not Jane has the right to recover the land from Sheena, given that she already paid the repurchase price to the revolutionary government. So, in held number Article 1164 in the New Civil Code, it is Article 1242, cannot be used in this case because the payment to the revolutionary government was an invalid payment. The government merely attached the property with attachment merely prohibited its alienation. For the provision to be considered in this case, the revolutionary government must be in the possession of the credit, however, it was not. Article 1243. Payment made to the creditor by the debtor after the latter has been judicially ordered to retain the debt shall not be valid. So, instances. Garnishment is the proceeding by which a debtor's creditor is subjected to the payment of his own debt to another. For example, Jane owes Liza 100,000. Liza in turn owes Sheena 10,000. Sheena brings an action against Liza, who claims insolvency but admits the credit which she has over Jane. Before Jane pays Liza, Jane is summoned into the proceeding and asked to retain the debt in the meantime. Thus, the debt is garnished. The reason is Jane should not pay Liza and instead she should pay Sheena. Should Sheena really be a judge, the creditor of Liza in the meantime is considered invalid under the law. Article 1244. The debtor of a thing cannot compel the creditor to receive a different one, although the latter may be of the same value as or more valuable than that which is due. In obligations to do or not to do, an act or forbearance cannot be substituted by another act or forbearance against the obligee's will. The obligation consists in delivery of a determinate thing. The thing agreed upon by the parties as stated in the contract is what must be delivered. A different thing would not suffice, but be it less, equally or more valuable than the thing specified in the contract. For example, Jane is obliged to give Liza a Chanel bag. Since Jane could not find one, she instead delivered a Gucci bag to Liza. Liza refused to accept it. So regardless of the value of Gucci bag, Liza, the creditor, cannot be compelled by Jane, the debtor, to receive a thing other than the Chanel bag, the thing stated in the obligation.
Article 1245 says that dation in payment whereby property is alienated to the creditor in satisfaction of a debt in a money shall be governed by the law of sales. There are four special modes of payment. The first is the dation in payment. The second is the application of payment. The third is payment of cession. And the fourth is the tender of payment and consignation. In the Article 1232 of the Civil Code, an obligation is extinguished by payment or performance. There is a payment if there is delivery of money or performance of an obligation. In Article 1245 of the Civil Code, provides a special mode of payment called the dation in payment or the dation in pago. Dation in payment is a special form of payment or a mode of extinguishment of an obligation, whereby the obligation is monetary but iyang ibayad is property. Like for example, si A naiutang kay B nga 1 million. But in the consent of A, ang ibayad ni B is ang iyang house and lot. But Article 1245 says that it shall be governed by the law of sale. Since governed siya sa law of sales, the conveyance must be deemed to extinguish the obligation to the extent only of the value of the property as agreed or as may be proved. Like, for example, if ang house and lot ni B is worth of 900,000 lang siya. Unya ayang utang kay A kay 1 million. So naa pa siya 100,000 nga utang kay A. Article 1246 says, when the obligation consists in the delivery of an indeterminate or generic thing whose quality and circumstances have not been stated, the creditor cannot demand a thing of superior quality. Neither can the debtor deliver a thing of inferior quality. The purpose of the obligation and the other circumstances shall be taken into consideration. A debtor who is required to deliver a generic item cannot be forced to deliver a higher quality one. He can force the creditor to accept a poor item either. Considering the purpose of the duty, a delivery of average or medium quality will serve. The rule is only on quality and not on quantity. The superior or inferior rule is applicable only on generic or indeterminate things as to their quality and not on quantity. If the question is quantity and it cannot be determined without the need of a new contract between the parties, the contract is void under Article 1409. For example, Mario promised to deliver Luigi a horse. Luigi cannot compel Mario to deliver a prize-winning race horse. Neither can Mario require Luigi to accept an old sickly horse. If Luigi owns a stable of race horses and horse racing is his main diversion in life, which the fact is known to Mario and the price agreed upon is the reasonable price for a race horse, then Mario must deliver a race horse. Article 1247, unless it is otherwise stipulated, the extrajudicial expenses required by the payment shall be for the account of the debtor. With regard to the judicial cost, the rule of court shall be governed. The general rule of Article 1247 is the debtor pays for extrajudicial expenses. Expenses outside the court shall be paid by the debtor because he is the one benefited in the obligation. The exemption of it is when it is otherwise stipulated. Under the rule of court, Section 1, Rule 142, the cost of an action shall, as a rule, be paid by the losing party. The court may, however, for special reasons, adjudge that either party shall pay the cost or that the same be divided as may be equitable. Article 1248, unless there is an express stipulation to that effect, the creditor cannot be compelled partially to receive the prestations in which the obligation consists. Neither may be the debtor be required to make partial payments. However, when the debt is in part liquidated and in part unliquidated, the creditor may demand and the debtor may effect the payment of the former without waiting for the liquidation of the latter. Under the Article 1233 of the Civil Code, performance should be generally be completed. A debt shall not be understood to have been paid unless the thing or service in which the obligation consists has been completely delivered or rendered, as the case may be. Hence, partial performance is not allowed generally under Article 1248. The general rule of this provision is that the payment must be complete. Let's talk about its exception. First, if there is stipulation to that effect. The second exemption is that when debt is in part liquidated and in part unliquidated. So, let's have an example for the first paragraph. So, si A na ay utang kay B nga 1 million pesos nga due karon. But si A dili siya pwede mo compel kay B nga tagaan na niya partial nga 500,000 si B. And otherwise dili pwede mo compel si B nga partial lang ang ihatag ni A. Unless naato sa ilang agreement nga pwede sila mohatag og partial. So, let's have an example for the second paragraph. Si A na utang kay B nga 1 million pesos and plus damages. But miski wala pa na determine ang exact amount sa damages, but the 1 million pesos is now liquidated and due siya karong adlaw. Si B pwede siya mo-compel kay A nga bayaran tong 1 million pesos and bahalag later na ang damages.
And the Article 1249 states that the payment of debts in money shall be made in the currency stipulated, and if it is not possible to deliver such currency, then in the currency which is legal tender in the Philippines. The delivery of promissory notes payable to order or bills of exchange or other mercantile documents shall produce the effect of payment only when they have been cashed or when through the fault of the creditor they have been impaired. So, in the meantime, the action derived from the original obligation shall be held in the abeyance. So, first, what is legal tender? So, legal tender refers to the currency which may be used for payments of debts, whether public or private, and which of the creditor cannot refuse to accept. So, here in the Philippines, the legal tender covers all notes and coins issued by the Central Bank of the Philippines. Also, under the Presidential Decree number 72, effective November 19, 1972, there is a limitations in the use of coins as legal tender to lessen the burden in behalf of the creditors. So, the creditor may only accept what the law allows, and the law allows 1 centavo coins and 5 centavo coins legal tender up to 20 pesos. Second, the other coins like 50 cents, 10 cents, and 1 peso are legal tender up to 50 pesos. And third, all the bills or money issued by the central bank are valid tenders unlike coins. Next is, as to payment in negotiable documents like, for example, checks, the promissory notes payable to order, or bills of exchange are not considered as legal tender. So, kato silang mga checks, mga bitang a payment through kanang papilang bitaw. So, dili na sila ma-considered as legal tender kay tungod ma-consider lang na sila legal tender if ma-encash na to siya or ma-exchange na to siya with money. So, for example, Jade issued a 100,000 peso through a check to Emerald as a payment of her debts. So, Jade's payment shall take effect if the check given has been encashed and have been honored or recognized already by the Joey Bank and have been exchanged with cash money. So, katong kwarta na iyang gihatag or katong check na iyang gihatag, dili to siya ma-recognize as a payment sa iyang utang if dili to siya ma-encash. Now, proceed to the next article, which is the Article 1250. So, 1250 provides that in case an extraordinary inflation or deflation of the currency stipulated should supervene,
The value of the currency at the time of the establishment of the obligation shall be the basis of payment unless there is an agreement to the contrary. So, what is extraordinary inflation? So, extraordinary inflation or deflation only exists when there is a decrease or increase in the purchasing power of the Philippine currency, which is unusual or beyond common fluctuation of the value said currency, and such increase or decrease cannot have been reasonably foreseen or was manifestly beyond the contemplation of the parties at the time of the establishment of the obligation. So, in order for extraordinary inflation or deflation to affect an obligation, there should be requisite that must be proven. So first there should be an official declaration of extraordinary inflation or deflation from the Bangko Sentral of the Pilipinas or the BSP. Second, the obligation was contractual in nature, and lastly, the parties should have expressly agreed to consider the effects of the extraordinary inflation or deflation. Pero if wala namang agreement about that, then the value of the currency at the time the obligation was established will be the basis of payment. Proceed to the next article, which is the Article 1251. The Article 1251 states that the payment shall be made in the place designated in the obligation, there being no express stipulation, and if the undertaking is to deliver a determinate thing, the payment shall be made wherever the thing might be at the moment the obligation was constituted. In any other case, the place of payment shall be the domicile of the debtor. If the debtor changes his domicile in bad faith, or after he has incurred in delay, the additional expenses shall be borne by him. These provisions are without prejudice to venue under the rules of court. So the article means that both parties should have an agreement to have a specific place that is only designated to where the payment shall be made. So in the contrary, if there is no agreement made, then two rules shall be applied. So first is the delivery of a determinate thing. So the delivery of a determinate thing should be made in the place where the thing might be at the time the obligation has been made or established. The second one and the last one is the other cases. So as to other cases, which includes the delivery of money, generic thing, or to perform an obligation, it should be made at the place of the debtor. But if the debtor changes address in bad faith, or after niya wala natuman niyang obligation, then all the additional expenses will be paid by him. So for example, Emerald borrowed money to Jade that is worth 100,000 pesos, and then they both agree to deliver the payment to Jade's personally. So if the payment is through a determinate thing, then the place of delivering the payment should also be at Jade's, since dito man sila nagkaagrihan. On the other hand, if Emerald delays the payment shall be made at Emerald's, since matik naman na panilngon siya ni Jade no kay na-delay ang payment. But Jade was late to know nga nibali na dahil si Emerald without her knowing kung asa, which is very inappropriate for Emerald. So, all the additional expenses will be shouldered by Emerald alone, since siya ang nakadelay, siya ang wala ni bayad, siya ang magbago sa tanan. Proceed to the next article, or the subsection 1, the application of payments, Article 1252. So, the Article 1252 provides that he who has various debts of the same kind in favor of one and the same creditor may declare at the time of making the payment to which of them the same must be applied, unless the parties so stipulate, or when the application of payment is made by the party for whose benefit the term has been constituted. Application shall not be made as to debts which are not yet due. If the debtor accepts the creditor a receipt in which an application of the payment is made, the former cannot complain of the same unless there is a cause for invalidating the contract. So, what is application of payments? Application of payments is the designation of the debt to which should be applied to a payment made by a debtor who owes several debts in favor of the same creditor. So here in our Article 1252, it states that the debtor has various of debts of the same kind in favor of the same creditor. So given the description, the debtor may decide to which of those debts said payment is to apply when making the payment. So, and take note that if the application has been already made, it cannot be revoked unless the parties consent the revocation. So, ano nga ba ang purpose ng application of payments? Its purpose is to locate which debt should be cleared given that there are various debts that are due. So, there are requisites for application. First, there shall be one debtor and one creditor. Second, there shall be two or more debts. Third, the debts shall be of the same kind. And fourth, all debts are due. And lastly, the payment being made is not sufficient to settle all the obligation. So, when payment may apply to debt that is not due. So, as general rule, the application should not be made if the debts are not yet due. But, there are exceptions to this. The application can be made if, first, when the parties so stipulate or if ang both parties kay nasila agreement ba ning ana, and then second or the last is when the application of the payment is made by the party for whose benefit the term or period has been constituted. So, to whom right to choose belongs? So, sino nga ba ang may karapatang pumili? So, here's application of payment. As I've mentioned, the right to choose belongs to the debtor unless the parties agreed otherwise. So, if the application is properly made by the debtor and the creditor still refuses to accept the application of payment, then the creditor will be considered in delay. So, how application is made? So, first, debtor makes the designation. Ang mangungutang ang dapat magbuhat sa designation. Second, if the debtor fails to designate, creditor shall have the right to choose and must state his choice in the receipt. So, if dili mabuhat sa debtor ang pag-designate, so the creditor will take charge. So, he will be the one who will.
Article 1253, it states that if the debt produces interest, payment of the principal shall not be deemed to have been made until the interest have been covered. Diba sa pagbabayad naman talaga, unang babayaran yung interest before sa principal pag hindi sakto ang bayad na ibinigay. Kasi if sakto naman talaga yung bayad, hindi na kailangan ng application of payment. So this provision is mandatory. Meaning, hindi pwedeng sabihin ni debtor na sa principal muna i-apply ang kanyang payment, huwag muna sa interest. So, in that situation, pwedeng tumanggi si creditor unless i-waive niya ang kanyang right dito. Meaning, nung sinabi ni debtor na sa principal muna i-apply ang kanyang payment, umokay si debtor. So, walang problema. Walang problema basta both parties, si creditor at debtor ay nag-agree. So, example, Joe owes Amber 20,000 with 10% interest. Then, due date came, Joe paid Amber 20,000 pesos only. So, from that, kulang pa ang binayad ni Joe na 20,000 pesos kasi ang dapat babayaran niya, ang total is 22,000 pesos. Kasama na doon ang 10% interest sa 20,000 which is 2,000. So, how will you apply the payment? So, according to 1253, una munang babayaran ng interest na 2,000. So, the remaining 18,000 will be applied to the principal amount. So, meron pang balance na 2,000 sa principal. Article 1254. When the payment cannot be applied in accordance with the preceding rules, or if application cannot be inferred from other circumstances, the debt which is most onerous to the debtor among those due shall be deemed to have been satisfied. If the debts are of the same nature and burden, the payment shall be applied to all of them proportionately. In case walang ginawang application of payment sina creditor at debtor, so ang payment shall be applied to the most onerous debt. Pero kung ang debt ay of the same nature and burden, ang payment ay i-apply to all of them proportionately. So what is onerous debt? So a debt is more onerous if it is more burdensome to the debtor. So how to determine if what is more burdensome? So actually there is no really fixed rule can be laid down in determining which debt is more burdensome to the debtor, since the condition of being more burdensome is a question of relative appreciation. The Supreme Court, however, in various decisions has given some rules which can be allowed or used as guide to determine whether one debt is more burdensome than another. So the first one is an interest-bearing debt is more onerous than a non-interest-bearing debt, even if the latter is an older one. So talaga namang mas burdensome yung interest-bearing debt kasi nga tumutubo yung utang or nanganganak yung utang. Mas lalo siyang yung utang ay mas lalong lumalaki habang mas tumatagal. Kumpara doon sa non-interest bearing debt na kahit matagal na hindi pa rin siya lumalaki kasi nga walang interest. The second one is a debt as a sole debtor is more onerous than as a solidary debtor. The third one, all things being equal, older debts are more onerous. The fourth one is debts secured by a mortgage or by pledge are more onerous than unsecured debts. And of two interest-bearing debts, the one with a higher rate is more onerous. Of course, yung mas malaki yung interest, yun talaga yung mas onerous. And the last one is an obligation with a penalty clause is more burdensome compared to the one without penalty clause. So what are the rules in case no application has been voluntarily made by the creditor and the debtor? So the first one is apply to the most onerous debt if the debts are of different nature. And the second one, if the debts are of the same nature and burden, the payment shall be made to all proportionately. For example, Joe owes Amber 120,000 and another debt also owes Amber 60,000. So Joe, without making any application of payment, paid Amber 30,000 pesos only. So how should be the payment applied, assuming that both debts are of the same nature and burden? So the answer, the payment should be applied proportionately. So if we are going to get the ratio of the first debt to the second debt, there is a ratio of 2:1. So from the 30,000 nga payment na ibinigay ni Joe kay Amber, yung 20,000 doon ay i-apply sa first utang na 120,000. At yung 10,000 naman ay i-apply doon sa second na utang, which is yung sa 60,000. So yung 120,000 ay magiging 100,000 na lang. At yung 60,000 ay magiging 50,000 na lang. So yung payment na ibinigay ni Joe ay na-apply natin proportionately. Subsection 2, Payment by Cession. So Article 1255, it states that the debtor may cede or assign his property to his creditors in payment of his debts. This cession, unless there is stipulation to the contrary, shall only release the debtor from responsibility for the net proceeds of the thing assigned. The agreements which, on the effect of the cession, are made between the debtor and his creditors shall be governed by special laws. So what do you mean by payment by cession? So payment by cession is another special form of payment. It is the assignment or abandonment of all the properties of the debtor for the benefit of his creditors, in order that the latter or the creditor may sell the same and apply the proceeds thereof to the satisfaction of their credits. So, yung payment by cession is a process in which yung mga properties ni debtor ay ita-transfer kay creditor para maibenta ni creditor yung mga properties. At yung kita sa pagbibenta ng mga properties na yon ay yun yung ibabayad sa utang or yung bayad sa utang. So, ano-ano yung mga requisites ng payment by cession? So, the first one, there must be 2 or more creditors. The second one, the debtor must be insolvent, either partially or completely insolvent. Third one is the assignment must involve all the properties of the debtor. And the fourth one is the cession must be accepted by the creditors, dahil hindi mo ito mai-impose dun sa mga unwilling na creditors. Kaya nga, this provision, it talks about voluntary or contractual assignment, which requires the consent of all the creditors as distinguished from legal or judicial assignment, which is governed by insolvency law. So what are the effects of payment by cession? So unless there is a stipulation to the contrary, the assignment does not make the creditors the owners of the property. Meaning, yung mga creditor ay merely assignees lang. Binigyan lang sila ng authority to sell the property. Otherwise, if yung ownership ng properties ay itinransfer sa creditor, so magiging same na sila sa dation in payment. Another effect is that the debtor is released from his obligation only up to the amount of the net proceeds of the sale of the property assigned. Unless there is a stipulation to the contrary, the balance remains to be collectible. In other words, the debtor is still liable if there is a balance. So for example, Joe owes Amber, Adzi, and Amy with a total amount of 1 million pesos. Pero yung assets ni Joe ay hindi sapat para mabayaran yung utang niya. So, with the consent of his creditors, he may assign his property to them para maibenta nila yung property to satisfy their credits. So, if lahat ng net proceeds ni Joe sa lahat ng property niya ay only 900,000 pesos, so si Joe ngayon ay still liable for the 100,000 pesos na balance. So now we are going to distinguish dation in payment and cession. So of course, both are substitute forms of payment or performance. They are governed by the law on sales. So their differences are in dation, there are usually one creditor, while in cession, there are several creditors. Diba natutunan natin kanina sa requisites of cession, of payment by cession, kailangan na merong dalawa or more creditors. And the second one is dation does not presuppose the insolvency of the debtor or a situation of financial difficulties, while in cession, the debtor is insolvent at the time of the assignment. Kanina, sa requisites of payment by cession, natutunan din natin na kailangang si debtor ay insolvent, either partially or completely. The third one is dation does not involve all the property of the debtor, while in cession extends to all the property of the debtor subject to execution. And the fourth one is in dation, the creditor becomes the owner of the thing given by the creditor, while in cession, the creditors only acquire the right to sell the thing and apply the proceeds to their credits pro rata. Diba, yung mga creditors are only assignees. Binigyan lang sila ng authority para mag-sell ng property at yung kita ay yun yung bayad sa utang ng debtor. Subsection 3, Tender of Payment and Consignation. Article 1256 states that if the creditor to whom tender of payment has been made refuses without just cause to accept it, the debtor shall be released from responsibility by the consignation of the thing or sum due. Consignation alone shall produce the same effect in the following cases. First, when the creditor is absent or unknown or does not appear at the place of payment. Second, when he is incapacitated to receive the payment at the time it is due. Third, when without just cause he refuses to give a receipt. Fourth, when two or more persons claim the same right to collect. And fifth, when the title of the obligation has been lost. So, tender of payment, it is an act on the part of the debtor or offering the creditor the thing or amount due. So, if it is an monetary obligation, then ito yung pera or yung bayad na in-offer. If it is an obligation to give, then ito yung object or bagay mismo sa obligation na in-offer. So, ang tender of payment is a act of offering. It is also a preparatory act or preparatory for consignation. So, consignation, it is the act of depositing the thing or amount due with the proper court when the creditor does not desire or refuses to accept payment. So, after mo mag-tender ng payment, tapos si creditor ayaw tanggapin or refuses to accept the payment without just reason. So, what should you do? So, magbayad ka dayon dili tanggapon sa creditor. So, you have an option to consign it with the proper authority. So, i-deposit mo doon sa court yung payment or yung object ng obligation para naman ma-extinguish yung obligation mo. And of course, this is done after complying the formality required by law. Di naman diretso na muadto ka sa court dayon i-deposit diretso ang kwarta. You have to file a case for that matter. So, in the first paragraph of this provision, we must keep it in mind that the tender of payment without consignation does not extinguish the debt or obligation. Sabi nga, the debtor shall be released from the responsibility. So, ano ang magre-release sa debtor from responsibility? It is the consignation of the thing or sum due. Kaya nga, tender of payment and consignation, dapat magkasama yung dalawa. So, for example, si Joe mayroong utang kang Amber na 1 million pesos due today, tapos itong si Amber ayaw tanggapin yung pera na ibinayad ni Joe without justifiable cause or valid reason. So, ano ang dapat gagawin ni Joe? So, Joe must deposit it to the court, and this is called consignation. If merong valid reason or justifiable cause si creditor para tanggihan ang bayad ni debtor, hindi valid yung consignation. So, tender payment must be first in legal tender. So, if ang binayad ni debtor ay cheque, so hindi ito legal tender, so mayroong right si creditor na tanggihan yung payment. Second one is in tender payment must includes interest. So, for example, yung ibinayad ni debtor ay kulang, walang interest. So, mayroong karapatan si creditor na huwag tanggapin yung bayad ni debtor. And the third one is tender payment must be unconditional. So, if yung payment na ibinigay ni debtor ay may condition, so mayroon ding karapatan si creditor na wag tanggapin kasi nga tender payment must be unconditional. Tender of payment, diba, is prior para magkaroon ng consignation. So, dapat ang tender of payment must be proved by the debtor para pag nag-consign siya sa court, kailangan niyang i-prove na nagkaroon ng valid tender of payment. Pero, there's instances na pwede nang di na kailangan ang tender of payment. Pwede nang diretsyo sa consignment. And that is provided sa second paragraph sa Article 1256. It provides situation na kahit walang tender of payment, consignation, there is only consignation alone. The first one is when the creditor is absent or unknown or does not appear at the place of payment. Wala si creditor, walang tatanggap ng payment mo, so pwede agad consignation. The second one is when he is incapacitated to receive the payment at the time it is due. Kaysa ibigay mo incapacitated siya, what if pag ibinigay mo tapos nawala, hindi naman ma-extinguish yung obligation mo pag ganyan ang nangyari. So, pwede mong gawin is i-consign mo na lang iyon sa court. So, please take note that this is only applicable if walang legal representative si creditor na pwedeng tumanggap sa payment. Kasi if meron naman at alam ni debtor, pwede naman sa kanila yun ibibigay. For example, minor. So, ibibigay mo ang payment sa parents niya, di ba? Pero, if nagbayad ka tapos ayaw tanggapin without justifiable cause, pwede kang mag-consign. The third one is when or without just cause, he refuses to give a receipt. So, for example, nagbayad ka tapos ayaw magbigay ni creditor ng receipt. So, ang gagawin mo na lang is i-consign mo na lang sa court. The fourth one is when two or more persons claim the same right to collect. So, for example, marami ang nagki-claim tapos hindi mo ma-determine kung sino ang totoo, sino ang dapat mag-claim ng payment. So, ang gagawin mo na lang is mag-consign ka na lang sa court or consignation. And the fifth is when the title of the obligation has been lost. Meaning, yung written document is nawala. So, much better na i-deposit na lang sa court. So, what if after nag-tender of payment, si debtor, which is si creditor, ayaw tanggapin yung pera without justifiable cause. Tapos, si debtor naman, ilang years muna bago gumawa ng consignation. Or after niyang nag-tender of payment, hindi mo na siya kaagad nagawa ng consignation. Matagal pa muna. So, pag ganito daw ang case, the interest should run.
Article 1257 states that in order that the consignation of the thing due may release the obligor, it must be first announced to the persons interested in the fulfillment of the obligation. The consignation shall be ineffectual if it is not made strictly in consonance with the provision which regulate payment. So, in order na ma-release yung debtor sa kanyang obligation, kailangan mayroong prior notice to persons interested. Sino-sino nga ba ang mga ito? These are guarantees, soliditary debtors, creditors, and mortgages. So, kapag walang prior notice mula sa kanila, yung consignation will be void or invalid.
Let's continue to Article 1258. So, Article 1258 states that consignation shall be made by depositing the things due at the disposal of the judicial authority, before whom the tender of payment shall be proved in a proper case, and the announcement of the consignation in other cases. The consignation having been made, the interested party shall also be notified thereof. So, itong provision na to, it just answered the question how consignation is actually made. So, paano nga ba? It said that it shall be made by depositing the things due at the disposal of judicial authority. Tapos, there must be proof that tender had been previously made and have notice to interested person that consignation will be made. Ano nga ba ang essential requisites ng valid consignation? First is existence of valid debt that is due. Ibig sabihin, may utang at valid debt talaga, hindi void yung utang. Second, tender payment by the debtor and refusal by the creditor to accept it without justifiable reason. If the tender is required, there must be valid prior tender. Third, previous notice of consignation to interested person. So, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na yung consignation must be first announced to persons interested. Without such notice, yung consignation as a payment will be void. The purpose of this is to give the creditor a chance to reconsider the previous refusal para maiwasan pa yung litigation na umabot pa sa court. Fourth is consignation of the sum or the thing due. Fifth, subsequent notice of consignation to interested persons. So, meaning, may dalawang notice. Yung isa is prior to the consignation and the other one is after the deposit. This is also mandatory. If there is no subsequent notice, then the consignation will be void. Article 1259. The expenses of consignation, when properly made, shall be charged against the creditor. So, dapat naman talaga kasi kung hindi with his fault, hindi yun naabot to that point. Had the creditor accepted the payment, there is no consignation. So, sa Article 1259, sinasabi lang na yung magbe-barrier ng expenses for consignation is the creditor. Article 1260. So, Article 1260 states that once the consignation has been duly made, the debtor may ask the judge to order the cancellation of the obligation before the creditor has accepted the consignation or before a judicial declaration that the consignation has been properly made. The debtor may withdraw the thing or the sum deposited, allowing the obligation to remain in force. So, what is the effect when the consignation has been duly made? The debtor may ask the judge to order cancellation of the obligation. So, kapag ganon, the obligation niya to pay the creditor will remain in force kasi nga withdraw niya. It is the debtor's right to withdraw prior to the declaration ng court that consignation was properly made. Kasi after all, siya pa rin naman yung owner ng pera o bagay na dineposit niya. So, in that case, the one will carry the expenses will be the debtor. Kasi nga, kinuha niya. So, hindi si creditor yung magbe-bear ng expenses, kundi yung debtor. Okay? So, Article 1261. Article 1261 states that if the consignation having been made, the creditor shall be or shall authorize the debtor to withdraw the same. He shall lose every preference which he may have over the thing. The co-debtors, guarantors, and sureties shall be released. So, if the consignation having been made, ito yung sinasabi ko na pwede pa rin ma-withdraw ni debtor if authorized by creditor. Yun nga lang, kapag pumayag si creditor, the effect of this is, first, the obligation subsists. So, may utang pa rin si debtor kay creditor. Second, creditor loses preference over the thing. And lastly, co-debtor, guarantors, and sureties are released.